Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The decision by the Governor of the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates by 50 basis points took the country by surprise. Just days earlier, many people believed the Governor had in fact cautioned the country about the dangers of excessive stimulus. So what prompted this sharp cut in interest rates? And beyond that, how does Dr. Rajan view the economy, and how does he respond to the opinion of many investors that not enough has been done to push reforms or improve ease of business? Those are some of the key issues I shall raise today with the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Raghuram Rajan. Dr. Rajan, 10 days before you took the country by surprise when you announced an unexpected 50 basis point cut in interest rates, many people believed that in fact you'd cautioned the country against the danger of excess stimulus which could fan inflation and deficits, and you even cited the meltdown example of Brazil. This led some to believe that your interest rate cut was either contradictory or possibly a U-turn. How do you respond to that viewpoint?
Well, I think I started that speech 10 days before policy by saying this had nothing to do with the policy that was to come. And the point really was that I was making a medium-term point, that we have to be careful about relying on one instrument or making one instrument the scapegoat for all the problems in the economy. We need all instruments working at the same time to get the economy kicking and firing from where it is now.
So can I understand from your answer that you believe this 50 basis point rate cut is essential to get the economy kicking and firing?
I think it's part of the process of getting investment up. So the real deficiency in our economy today is private investment is not picking up, as it should at this stage of the cycle. And so the key concern of policymakers is how do we get it started, how do we get it going? And we see some green shoots elsewhere. Public investment is starting to pick up, say in roads. Consumption in urban areas is starting to pick up. Rural areas, perhaps if the eventual food production is reasonable, you may see some pickup. But the key missing factor in stronger and sustainable growth is private investment.
I want very much to talk about private investment. In fact, I want to focus on how you view the economy. Before I come to that, however, let me ask you another couple of questions on inflation. I take it that your decision to cut interest rates by 50 basis points is based on your reading that inflation will stay below 6% this year. But you also accept that the 3.6% CPI figure could be deceptive because of base effects. So if inflation starts creeping up, are you mentally prepared to increase rates in December or January?
No, we've said that we are going to look through these base effects. So while we look through the 3.7 and said it's not as low as you think it is, we're also going to look through the creep up, which will definitely occur over the next few months as the base effects wane. So the base effect to the average listener is really a statistical artifact which doesn't reflect the real ongoing rate of inflation. Today we are probably seeing something like 5.5%, and it may creep up a little more, but we think we should be below 6 by January.
But are you therefore ruling out any adjustment in terms of raising rates towards the end of the year or January?
No, I think what we've said is we're happy with the path as of now. And of course, if new information comes in, we don't expect inflation to go above 6 by January. We think it will come below. But if substantial new information comes in, for example, I mean, just think about a scenario where oil prices regain 75, 80, 90, and that creates substantial inflationary pressures in the economy. Obviously, we'll have to take that information into account in making our decisions. But as of now, we don't foresee any change in the monetary path right now.
One other quick question on inflation. Are you confident that the monsoon effect on agriculture won't rekindle inflation?
The monsoon effect on agriculture, I'm sorry, are you saying that inflation will pick up with the weak monsoon?
That's right.
Yeah, no, it is something that we have to watch for. Clearly what the government has done in the last monsoon and in the early stages of this monsoon is done a fair amount of work to ensure that some of the adverse effects of the monsoon are mitigated. For example, ensuring fresh seed is available after the early plantation didn't work out, things like that. So what we have to see is how this proactive management of the government works in keeping food prices contained. The other factor which is keeping food prices contained is global prices, which have remained relatively low over the last couple of years. So some combination of government management and global prices, including the possibility of imports when necessary, I think will keep food inflation moderate. But that's an expectation, and of course we have to see how it pans out.
Let's then come, Dr. Rajan, to your assessment of the present state of the economy. When you look at macro statistics like the fiscal deficit, the current account deficit, GDP growth and inflation, one gets a fairly reassuring picture. But when you look at the economy in terms of the micro picture, credit growth, consumer demand, corporate income and profits, job growth, it's actually far from reassuring. What do you make of these mixed signals?
Okay, there are two things that have changed, and the two are actually related. One is inflation has come down. So earlier, when we saw nominal growth at 15%, we were very happy. But we didn't realize that you had to take off 6, 7, 8% inflation to get at real growth from that. Today, nominal growth has come down substantially from there, and of course, in some sectors, you have actual deflation, which means that because prices are going down, even a little volume growth may not give you total revenue growth. So we are in a different environment with lower inflation, and that is causing some people to underestimate the extent of growth that is actually there. So credit growth of 9-10% with 2 or 3% inflation is the same as credit growth of 15% with 8% inflation. Real credit growth is the same, and people don't account for that. That's one. But the second thing, and I think this accounts for some of the angst in industry, is that our growth doesn't quite feel like a 7.5% growth economy. And that's perhaps because the new GDP series is different from the old GDP series. Some analysts are actually translating back from the new GDP series to the old GDP series and saying today's 7.5 is probably something less in the old GDP series. And that's really the kind of feeling that industry has. Growth is not quite the old 7.5.
So in other words, do you share the concern that perhaps the new GDP series is giving us a misleading picture of how well the economy is performing?
Well, as Mr. Pranab Sen says, you should accept that the new GDP series is attempting to do things better. But therefore, comparing the new with the old is probably unwarranted. So if you were a policymaker, which I am, you'd probably, in your mind, also mentally translate the new GDP series to the old series and say, well, maybe I should take a little bit off to reflect where the economy truly is. And this is partly a reason why we were prepared to be more accommodative this time, saying that growth still hasn't got into full recovery mode. We are a recovering economy, but we're not yet fully recovered. There is still, in economic parlance, a negative output gap. There is still disinflationary pressures in the economy. So we could be a little, we could do a little more than we otherwise would.
In which case, let me ask you, how confident are you that the government can meet its 3.9% fiscal deficit target set in the budget? Is there a danger that the cumulative effect of OROP, the Seventh Pay Commission, the slowing down of economic growth, the fact that we have special packages for Bihar and we could have special packages for other states that go to the polls next year, as well as, of course, the possibility we're going to miss the disinvestment target whilst the government is pushing up expenditure on rural employment guarantee schemes. Could the cumulative effect of these 5-6 things push the fiscal deficit into 4% territory?
I think the government has repeatedly, even yesterday, reiterated its commitment to sticking to the target. So the key question is, can you achieve that target while maintaining the quality of expenditure high? Or are you again, in the last few months of the government, going to cut back on certain kinds of spending which probably would benefit the economy in the longer run? So that's really the question, and I think the government is trying to maintain the quality of spending also. You're seeing spending on roads improve or increase, you're seeing plans on railways and so on, but also in terms of subsidies, trying to target them better. For example, yesterday the Finance Secretary talked about doing away with interest subventions and distorted interest rates, and instead giving a direct transfer to the beneficiary, which would avoid the kind of interest rate distortion that plagues the economy today. So I think there is a focus on trying to improve the quality of expenditure. I think some of the moves that are being done will be long-term beneficial, such as trying to resolve the discount problem in a big, substantial way once and for all, with a lot of conditions which will essentially reduce the loss-making nature of these companies. I think these are the kinds of long-term moves which take a little time to put into place, but will essentially serve the economy in the longer run, which we need today and which the government is attempting to do.
I fully accept the point you're making about the need to improve the quality of expenditure, but in the process, are we in danger of missing the 3.9 target? Because there's a lot of expenditure piling up.
We've had 3 or 4 years now of last-minute sort of expenditure containment, especially in the last quarter. And I think this has been a little difficult for the economy, because you have one quarter that is probably the second quarter in the year where expenditure starts kicking into place. It runs during the third quarter, and then the fourth quarter, when the targets are in danger of being breached, suddenly you have substantial contraction. I think the government is fully aware of this. This is one of the reasons why the deficit target was I think, made easier last year. The target was stretched over 2 years in order to contain this kind of bad expenditure management. My hope is that with all that the government is doing, it accounts for some of these packages and essentially will be able to smooth over spending over the year rather than have feast and famine in expenditure.
Now, in June, you reduced the RBI's estimate of growth for 2015-16 from 7.8 to 7.6%. In September, just a week ago, you further reduced it from 7.6 to 7.4. Separately, first quarter growth has come in at just 7, substantially below the quarter before that. Do you believe that, given this, it seems unlikely that we can achieve the budget target of 8.1 to 8.4%? Yeah, well, our estimate is what it is. It's an estimate, and our sense is 7.4 for the year. But I think we focus a little too much on what the GDP number will be. Of course, it matters for things like the budget, as you correctly point out. But the real issue is, can we set the stage for long-term sustainable growth? And that means fixing a whole variety of areas. We talked about distribution companies, things like mining, things like coal, but also the broader issue of improving the business environment, the ease of doing business, making credit more accessible to smaller, medium-sized enterprises. These are the long-term changes we need, rather than perhaps being a little too obsessed with short-term growth numbers. I think we need to set the stage for longer-term growth, keeping in mind, of course, we want reasonable growth in the short run also. Let me then come to that question you raised yourself a moment ago, the fact that there is no appetite for investment in the private sector. What is it that's holding up industrialists and investors? Is it the absence of a certain pace of reforms that would give them comfort? Is it the fact that ease of business is being promised but not delivered? What is it that's holding them back?
See, one of the things we have to be careful about is, suddenly demanding a Scandinavia-like business environment in India overnight. That's not going to happen, or a US-style business environment. And our industrialists have invested in much tougher environments than we have today. So it can't be that it's the difficulty of doing business which has suddenly changed. Of course, we're all aware that there were certain issues with governance, with permissions and so on, But some of those issues have been addressed and things have gotten a little better. So why the paucity of investment? And my sense is the primary factor here is weak demand. Some of it is domestic, so investment by others creates investment for some, creates demand for some companies' products. So lack of investment is itself part of the reason why others aren't investing. But I think one of the biggest factors we don't pay enough attention to is the external environment. We essentially export and import goods and services north of 50% of GDP. And therefore, the weak global environment means a number of industries are being affected because there's not enough global demand for their products. You see places like cement, steel, and so on. At the margin, global demand is what gives the energy to those sectors, gives growth to those sectors. And because of its weakness, some of these sectors are not doing very well.
You know, you began your answer, Dr. Rajan, by talking about the external environment and the fact that the external environment wasn't providing the necessary ambience and impetus for our economy. In that context, how do you view what's happening in China? Do you see China slowing down as an opportunity for India, as Arvind Panagriya has said, or do you see it more as a challenge because it could actually add to the adverse external environment, as Arvind Subramanian seems to be suggesting? Which of the two?
Well, can I say both? The real point, I think, here is no country's adversity in this interconnected world can be an unmitigated blessing for us. So I don't think China slowing down is necessarily good news for us overall. However, it has a silver lining in the sense that it may be, under these circumstances, it is easier for us, for example, to attract capital to FDI in India, and that would be a source of potential growth for us. So there are some silver linings here, but I think in general, in a global environment of weak demand, with one major economy slowing further and providing even less demand, it's not good news for anybody.
Now, in this context, the Prime Minister recently, at a meeting where you were present, advised Indian industrialists, in fact, he encouraged Indian industrialists to take more risks. But at the same time, when Indian industrialists look at what's happening on the reform front, they see the GST hasn't happened and it's likely to miss the 1st April 2016 deadline. Land acquisition, as far as the central government is concerned, has been virtually given up. It's now left to the states, but who knows how many states will take it up and who knows in what shape and form they'll take it up. So given the lack of pace of reform, is it likely that industrialists will step in and want to take more risk when already they are adverse to it?
Well, as I said again, industrialists have been used to a difficult environment. We have, good business people. They've shown their mettle in the past, and it's not as if suddenly it's gone backwards. It's just, if at all the complaint is, it's not going forward at the pace that some of them expected. Now, the truth is there's a lot of steady reform happening. There are lots of places where we're sort of chipping away, including, for example, this attempt to make the business environment easier and friendlier. So I think there is progress being made, but at the same time, you can't wait till all the things happen and then you start investing. The Prime Minister's point was simply, look, if there was riskless investment, then we wouldn't need you. You are the risk takers in the economy, and you have to be willing to take risks for the economy to go along, to move ahead. And trust that we will do our level best to improve the environment as you put the investments into the ground. So start the process. Obviously, it takes 3-4 years to build a full-fledged plant, but along the way, we will try and clear the way for you. I admit that the recent past, the experience of business with government permissions, governance, etc., hasn't been the finest. But clearly, the government has repeatedly said that we aim to change.
Now, in a recent speech that you made, you rightly criticized industry's attitude and dependence upon jugaad. A day or two later, the Business Standard did a leader raising the issue of what they called jugaad in government. Do you think that the jugaad approach also vitiates governments? And I mean governments in the plural rather than specifically just this one. And is the handling of reform one example of how jugaad in government operates?
Well, there are two aspects. One is that if we want to move to being a first world economy, we need the discipline that comes with transparency, rules, regulations, and so on. We have to have rules that are obeyed. We don't need too many rules, but what there is there on the books has to be obeyed. How to set those rules, in a sense, is the role of the government. And historically, Indian governments have been opportunistic. Where they can see an opportunity, this is Montek Ahluwalia and Dr. Manmohan Singh's famous get the camel's nose under the tent, and then before you know it, the whole camel can get in. But if you advertise the fact that the camel wants to get into the tent, nobody will let it in an economy where there are many interests. So I think that opportunistic reform is fine, but we should all know that we're going towards a place where we have more transparency, more clear rules of the game, clearer enforcement, and rapid enforcement. It shouldn't be that we have a ton of rules on the books which are really observed in the breach and nobody gets hit for not observing them. Similarly, from the business person's side, clearly we want a better business environment, we want fewer rules, but if those rules are in place, we should observe them. And so from the government side, I think the responsibility, governments and regulators, is to give a clearer business environment. But then once that is in place, or as we are going towards it, I think businesses' side is responsibility is not to subvert the set of rules that are there. And that's why I think we need to slowly move away from jugaad towards essentially observing the rules.
One quick question about the sort of image India is projecting to the world today, because you know better than me that investors care about the environment, the politics, the ambience of the country they come into. And you do a lot of traveling, you meet them. In fact, you're leaving for Lima later tonight, I'm told. How is India's image being distorted by the present beef-killing incident, the earlier incidents of attacks on rationalists, the background of love jihad and ghar wapsi and conversion? Is this working against the incredible effort the Prime Minister is making simultaneously to invite investors to come in?
I think there are always issues on the fringe. I think the Finance Minister said very clearly that these tend to distract rather than contribute. And clearly, there are certainly worrisome features which have to be dealt with, you know, on the basis of law and order and so on. The emphasis that the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have been putting on this being an economy which is trying to get it right and to move forward on a sustainable basis, I think that doesn't sit well with these kinds of incidents, and we need to figure out a way to reduce them. And certainly, I think there's a law and order issue here.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time, Governor Rajan, a couple of questions about yourself. The media, the pink papers in particular, are frequently writing about your differences with the Finance Minister. You have differences, it said, over setting an interest rate, but maybe those have now ended. You have differences over the power and scope of the RBI, and maybe even the power and scope of the Governor. Do you get on with Arun Jaitley?
Very well. I think the, let me not trash your community, but I do think that because there's so much competitive pressure for news, and obviously in every large organization there are some entities that want to create a little buzz themselves, people try to emphasize the differences rather than the large areas of commonality. And I have to say, my relationship with the Finance Minister has been of the highest order, ever since he moved into office. So that was when I first met him, but it's been great. And I think these reports of differences tend to exaggerate and sometimes overcomplicate what is essentially a very strong relationship.
In which case, are you enjoying the job of being governor? You've done it for just over 2 years. Are you enjoying it?
Well, let's say it's a very fulfilling job. This is one of the few jobs that every few days, not every day, but every few days you say, I actually am leaving the office feeling I did something. That's a great feeling to have, that you can actually accomplish something. I did a stint in the finance ministry. In government, it's much less easy to say at the end of the day, I finished and did something, because there's always one more committee to look at things and so on. But here, in the RBI, you can actually, at the end of the day, have a statement which says, we did something which has changed, hopefully for the better, the economy.
In which case, my last question, your present term has just over 11 months left. Would you accept a second term?
Well, you know, this is a hypothetical question. I haven't been offered one and so on. We'll cross the bridge when it comes.
All right, that is at least positive in its tone, even if not in its content, and you're smiling at that as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajan, for speaking to us. That was Raghuram Rajan, the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, speaking to me earlier today.